Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today, I'm so happy to have with me Susie Garden. Susie is a former registered nurse and is now a practicing clinical nutritionist, naturopath, and meditation and yoga instructor who helps women with stress, gut issues, and weight gain through her nutrition and wellness work. Susie is also host of her own podcast, The Wellness Glow, where she shares a lot of this work and a lot of these insights. So I'm super grateful to have you on here today, Susie, to share more of you. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I wanted to dive in because there's some really interesting topics that you work with that I feel like are kind of relevant always in the world, but right now, especially in the age of things like social media and Instagram, and like I always talk about with yoga, there's like Instagram yoga and then there's actual yoga.
Totally.
But in your, like, that can play a role in our inner dialogue and what we tell ourselves about what is like right or the way we quote unquote should be. In your experience, how much of the inner dialogue plays a role in things like gut issues and weight?
Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. The mind is so powerful, and we do really need to be so careful with what we say to ourselves on a daily basis. I mean, we talk to ourselves sometimes in a way that we would never talk to anybody else, and I mean in a negative way. And it absolutely has an impact on our body, and in a couple of different ways. I remember a few years ago seeing a movie called The Connection. I don't know if you've seen it. It was by an Australian journalist. And she said, you should watch it, it's really good. And she said that from the research that was going on at the time, that the mind, like we think of the mind as being like here in our head, or maybe kind of the front here. Many of us think of that, the mind just being here. But in fact, the research tells us that the mind is throughout our body. Pretty much in every single cell is our mind. To give you an example, the brain chemical serotonin, we used to think so. It's a brain chemical, so we think it was made in the brain. We've actually found out that over 90% of it is actually made in the gut. Yeah. And so, you know, just knowing that if the gut is not functioning well, the brain is not going to be functioning well, because we're not going to get our positive brain chemicals. And when we have negative self-talk going on, what it does is it starts to set up, well, there's a number of things that goes on, but it starts to set up the stress response. Okay, it starts to make us feel stressed, even if that's on a subconscious level. Generally, I think we will know if we're saying to us, oh, I'm so stupid, I shouldn't have done that. It does make you feel a little bit on edge, and it starts setting up that stress response. When we are in stress response, we have our increased heart rate, breathing rate, our blood pressure goes up, all of our resources go into fighting or running away. And what doesn't happen is then all of our oxygen and nutrients go away from our gut, from our intestines, because that's a lower level kind of function when we're trying to fight for our life, and also to our reproductive system. So that also gets less oxygen and nutrients. So you can see that if we're talking negatively to ourselves, we're setting ourselves up in stress, response, then we are already impacting on our gut health. And this is really important. That's just one of the ways that it impacts. We also, oh my gosh, we also have the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is like that physical connection between the brain and the gut. And when I used to be a theatre nurse many years ago. And one of the things we used to do when people had stomach ulcers, in theatre, the surgeons would come in and they would cut the vagus nerve to reduce the stomach acid that was getting produced when people were under stress. That's before we had all these amazing kind of drugs for stomach ulcers. And so when I think back to that, and I think, my gosh, they were going in and actually cutting the vagus nerve to stop that gut-brain connection.
Wow.
Which is just incredible. I don't even know if they do that anymore, because it causes other problems.
Yeah,
obviously,
it feels
we're
so
meant
problematic.
To have that connection. Yeah, we're meant to have that connection. But yeah, it's something that really is a known scientific thing. It's not just a woo-woo, oh, if you talk negatively to yourself, you're gonna, this is actually a scientific thing. So Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
Very important.
Oh my God, you're speaking my language, because I just keep like, when I talk about this stuff, I'm like, it's not woo woo, guys. Like, it is
Yeah,
science. It's not
it's
just,
real.
it's not just affirmations, but there's a reason why that works, and that makes a difference also.
Yeah.
And one of the things that like I'm aware of, and I'm glad that you brought it in also, is like the serotonin element and the gut health, because I know that when I start to feel a bit funky mentally, like whether it's my anxiety or there's just something and I'm like, oh, okay, something's up, it's usually because I haven't, I've been eating like maybe a little bit crappier than normal, or, you know,
Yeah.
like that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, right, okay, I need to get back to, but to me, like that, I'm, it makes me curious though, because what happens first? Like, does the mindset and like my self language or someone's self language impact their gut, or is it, through things like diet that impacts their mindset? Because I can kind of see it both ways. So what's your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
And yeah, it's a two-way connection.
Yeah.
It's a two-way connection. Yeah. So absolutely. It can start from either end. It can start from the negative thoughts and the things that we tell ourselves, whether they're real things, whether they're not real things. Or it can start by just having a really poor diet. And a really poor diet means high sugar, high processed foods, because, our gut microbiome, I always love telling people this. I think a lot of people know this by now. We have more cells in our microbiome, or more bacteria in our microbiome, than we have cells in the human body. And when you think about that, it means we are more microbiome than we are human. And yeah. And yeah, if you think about it, we're just really a home for our microbiome. Our microbiome is our major organism.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and we need to look after it. We actually need to feed it. We need to feed it, and we need to not damage it. And we damage it. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes you need to have antibiotics. If you need to have them, you need to have them, and you should take them. But if you can prevent that need to have the antibiotics, then you're looking after your microbiome. And what we also know about the gut, it is the seat of our immune system as well. So if you're not looking after that, then you're more likely to need those antibiotics. So it's really important to make sure we are nourishing that, because there is this two-way connection. So if we don't look after our diet, then we can get negativity going on our brain from that serotonin, but also just there's this microbiome connection. We're still learning about it. We're still learning about it. This is all very kind of new, sort of in the last 10 years. If I think back to when I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, and I used to work in the area of gastroenterology, and I used to talk to a lot of gastroenterologists and go to their conferences and things, and no one ever talked about the microbiome. Not at all. Not at all. And so this would have been, I'm talking the last 6 to 8 years. It wasn't a big thing in those circles. It probably was more in the research, because it was still like, we understand there's this thing, but we don't really fully understand the relevance of it and how it's impacting our health. And it used to be a thing of, oh, well, if you have some antibiotics, then have some probiotics and you'll fix everything and that'll be okay.
Right.
And and now we know that actually you're better off feeding prebiotics than probiotics after you have a course of antibiotics. You're better off just eating lots of nice high fiber foods, things like sweet potato, asparagus, garlic, onions, oats, that will actually feed the gut bacteria that you have. Because we know that the probiotics that we're putting into our body, for the most part, those generic ones that you go and buy at the pharmacy, once you stop taking them, within about 10 days, they're out of your body. So they're not really giving you a good long-term effect. There are certain probiotics that have been clinically trialed in certain illnesses that we know will work. And that's a completely different kettle of fish, because that's a prescription situation. But really the best thing to do is to look after what you've got by eating the right foods, not eating the wrong foods, and keeping that nice positive energy going within yourself, so that you're not getting yourself into stress response. You're not kind of running down your resources. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does, because it was it just shows that it works both ways. And, you know, like you
Totally.
said, with that new research that's only maybe 10 years old, like it takes so much, it's unfortunate because it takes so much longer than 10 years for it to hit the mainstream. So
Yes,
like, oh, it's just,
I know. Yeah, and sometimes we get the information, but we're
mm,
not quite sure how it really
yeah, we
works
don't know
in
what to
real
do
life.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of the research is done in a lab, and
Yeah.
what you can have happen on a petri dish is very different to all of the different human bodies and all of the
Mm,
different lifestyles that we have and the different cultures that we have and the different genetics that we have. So it
yeah.
is, yeah, it really comes down to understanding some basics about how your body works and how your microbiome works, knowing how to look after it. That's fairly simple. We can all do that.
Mm.
But yeah, and if something does go wrong, getting professional advice rather than just going and, you know, taking random supplements or random probiotics, which I think is
Yeah.
unfortunately what a lot of people do, because you think, oh, it must be okay, it's at the pharmacy, I'll just go and buy that. But you really need to know what you're doing with it.
Yeah, like there needs to be kind of like a plan in place to go, like, rather than
Yes.
just throwing everything at it. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
mm,
Because our microbiome is ours, it's unique.
yeah.
And when you go throwing in other probiotics, it can upset the balance. We have a balance of what we used to call them good and bad bacteria. Now we now call them beneficial and non-beneficial. Because
I
the
love that change in
non-beneficial,
languaging.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's true because just because when you think of bad bacteria, you think, oh, I want to get rid of it. But no, we need the balance.
Mm,
We need the non-beneficial bacteria in there and the beneficial bacteria in there. So if we're putting probiotics in, we can bring that out of balance.
yeah.
So even though they're good ones or beneficial
Yeah.
ones, we can bring it out of balance. So yeah.
It's so detailed also.
Oh yeah.
But like, so how do you, because I imagine that, you know, if people are coming to see you, they are open to like to a degree, they're open
Yeah.
to like receiving help because they've actually made the steps to come and see you. But
Yes.
I know humans well enough also to know that there's also going to be resistance even in that, right? Like, so like, you
Totally.
know, a lot of mindset and stories around especially things like weight and gut issues, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's like this disconnect of, no, that doesn't have anything to do with my mind, or, you know,
Mm,
my weight or whatever it is. And
yeah.
how do you kind of approach
Yeah.
that?
It's very complex actually
Mm,
because gosh, it depends on so many factors. Often when people are coming to see me, I get two types really. I get people who have been unwell for a long time and they've been through the whole medical system, and I'm essentially their last resort. They've tried everything
mm,
else. So thinking, oh well, I don't really believe in this stuff, but I'll go and give it a go because I'm desperate. And then you get other people who have a problem and immediately they'll try and address it. So it really just depends on how people are coming to me and how, I guess, how far along they are in their disease state, how depleted they are in
mm,
their nutrition. Because as you can imagine, if your gut health is not great, you're not absorbing your nutrients very well. When you're not absorbing your nutrients very well, you're also not building good brain chemicals. So through another pathway, you're not building good brain chemicals. Because, for example, as well as say serotonin, you need other minerals such as B vitamins, such as zinc, such as magnesium to build other brain chemicals. So
mm.
serotonin is the base for melatonin. If you're not sleeping very well, look
Yeah.
back. Is it your melatonin that's the problem? Is it the serotonin that's the problem? Do you have enough zinc? Do you have enough magnesium? Like it's just, there's a
Mm,
whole kind of cascade of things that could be the problem. And generally speaking, I mean, naturopathy is an ancient kind of science or art or both.
I think it's both.
And
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, and we've always maintained that good health starts from the gut. And the same
Mm,
with, you know, the father of medicine, Hippocrates, however you want to say it.
yeah.
He said the same thing, that all good health stems from the gut. So yeah, that's kind of, I always, no matter what someone comes in with, if they start coming with acne, if they come
Mm,
in with unexplained weight gain, sometimes they know why they're are gaining weight. If they've come in with stress, because definitely fixing up the gut will help with stress management. Anything that people come in with, I will always start with the gut.
mm.
and you will always get a benefit. And what's really interesting is, to me, is how many people live with significant gut issues and they think it's normal. You know, I have people that have had constipation since childhood, and for them, oh no, but that's normal for me. You know,
Yeah, they've normalized
that's
it because they're like,
normal.
it's been so long. Like,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes,
what happens
it's
there?
normal. Yeah, well, then you just go back to, okay, I'm educating that in fact it's not normal, and these are the consequences of not managing that. And I also get the opposite. I had one client who was actually a GP who'd been having diarrhea for 7 years, and I said,
Wow.
have you looked into that? And she said, oh yeah, I've done tests and I've got no infection or anything. That's just normal for me. And I went, it's not really normal though, is it? Oh, but it's normal for me. And then she came back to me 2 weeks later. I got her to do some like a food diary and monitor everything. And she came back, she goes, that really is not normal, is it? Like, when she really actually looked at it and put her thoughts and some mindfulness around it, she actually just went, yeah, that's not right. And we're actually able to fix it pretty quickly. It doesn't take much to fix it once we identify that it's a problem. And she had originally come to me for anxiety, and it was just an incidental question that I go through all of the body systems in my first consult, and it was just what's going on with your gut, and knowing that I needed to fix that before anything was going to happen with her anxiety.
Yeah, and I bet, like, I'd be willing to bet the anxiety kind of, became less of a problem at least.
It did.
And
Yeah.
like, but this kind of thing also, because it involves food, it can be such an emotional, like there's stories that we tell ourselves, like, even this is normal for me. Like we kind of attach to, like, I'm using that very generally, but like humans can attach to that so much, like, and then it becomes this emotional story that we tell ourselves. So like,
food is huge. Food is family, food is reward, food is punishment, food is culture. Like there's so many associations and attachments we have to food. Even the old, when you're a kid, you're not leaving the table until you finish the dinner. Food is punishment.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially. If you don't do this, you're not going to get dessert. Food is punishment, or food as reward. Do this and I'll buy you chocolate. So there's lots of these little things. And as a parent, I'm not a parent, but as a parent, you would think that's reasonable. That's how I was brought up. That seems nice to give them a reward if they tidy their room.
Yeah, or like they don't get dessert if they do this, or like,
why should they? If they haven't eaten all of their greens, why would they get dessert? And it seems very reasonable. It is reasonable, but what it does is starts to set up these associations with food that may not be serving that individual over time.
Especially once, like, we become adults, because there's so many association with things that might have served us at some point, and then, like, at some point they just aren't anymore. But
yes, and then of course you have the cultural things of food is love. And, particularly, for example, Italian people have a huge association with food and family and love. And sometimes I work with women that are in Italian families and they go, well, we have family dinner every week and I can't not eat everything that's on my plate. And if once I finish on my plate, they'll pile it up again. So how do I stick to my, eating plan when this is happening? So there's a lot of rewiring and rethinking, I guess, as to how to manage and approach food in a family environment. Big thing.
It's huge. And like, let alone the stories that we tell ourselves about it, about like, this is deprivation, or this is whatever it is.
I know. And
so
and even like the new thoughts now for kids, for any of the parents that are listening, is that you should allow the children to eat intuitively. And if they don't want to eat what's on their plate, that's okay. Like, don't eat what's on your plate. Eventually they'll get hungry enough that they'll eat, but without making like a really big deal out of it. And sort of, you're naughty because you're not eating, or you're bad, or you're very good because you ate all your dinner. Like, it's just, it starts to set up certain patterns and behaviors that can have big consequences long term.
Wow. there's just, there's so much
Mm.
into like that goes into all of the gut health things in general,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
because like you said, and even things like one thing that you said that made my brain go, oh, I don't think I knew that, but it makes so much sense, is serotonin being the like the precursor to melatonin. It's like,
Yes.
oh, right, of
Yes.
course.
Yes.
And then all of the rest, like it's
I know.
just
Yeah. And that's where you see sleep disturbances
mm,
with stress, with anxiety. You need to kind of just take it back. Where is the missing link? Where is
mm,
the nutritional, if it is a nutritional problem? Generally, there'll be an emotional component as well of
yeah,
some sort. Sometimes you do have to kind of find out if there's been any trauma that potentially has also contributed to the symptoms that they're having in the gut.
yeah,
Often there is, and often pretty much we all carry some sort of trauma. It would be on different levels, whether
yeah,
it's the
like big
trauma
T
of
and
a,
little t kind of
yeah,
trauma. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But for someone, there's for one person, what others might perceive as a lesser trauma or a little t, for someone could be their
Mm,
big T. And
yeah.
you don't know. So someone might say, oh, I haven't had any trauma. But then when I talk to them and you find out they were in a serious car accident, but they don't see that as
Yeah, they don't
trauma.
see the connection or they're
Yeah,
like, that's not relevant to my gut.
yeah,
Like it's like, well,
yeah. But I wasn't severely injured. But yeah, but you felt
yeah,
fear, you saw someone injured. That can all
yeah.
set up, trauma. But for someone's perception of that, they go, but that didn't really, that that happened, but I don't really feel like that was a trauma because I wasn't
Mm,
seriously injured. Yeah,
ugh,
it's
yeah.
interesting.
It is so interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you mentioned when you were a theatre nurse and everything like that. So you've worked in different kind of like health
Mm.
models, is how I will put it.
Yes, yes.
In your experiences, like what's the difference between, the so-called sickness model and then the wellness
Mm.
model of health?
Mm. Yeah, well, and I feel really fortunate to have experienced both in the lines of
Mm,
work that I've chosen. So the sickness model, and I was a registered nurse for around 10 years, and then I worked in the pharmaceutical industry after that. So I was in that kind of sickness model for quite some time. So sickness model, treating an illness as it appears,
yeah.
essentially is how I define that. And particularly in the pharmaceutical industry, that's exactly the whole purpose, is to treat the sickness as it appears. You've got high blood pressure, I've got a tablet for that.
Yeah.
You've got anxiety, I've got a tablet for that. And that's all very well and good, but it's not treating the underlying cause.
Mm,
And so when you move into kind of that nutritional and naturopathic model, it becomes about, well, how can we prevent the person getting to this point of having high blood pressure, for example? And so we
mm,
go back and look at stress, we look at gut health, we look at dietary interventions and things like that. And for some people, this is very important. If they have a parent that has perhaps passed away from a cardiovascular incident sort of young, then you really need to be making sure you're not waiting until you've got high blood pressure before you do something about that. You need to kind of
yeah.
really keep yourself as well as possible. So for me, the wellness model makes so much sense, is that we prevent illness from even before you're getting an inkling of it. So, you're doing exercise to keep your bones nice and healthy. You're getting some sunlight so that you're helping your vitamin D stores, because we
Mm,
know that the majority of us are vitamin D deficient. And so there's so much we can do that doesn't necessarily going to cost a lot. It's fun. It's also good for our mental health to be out in nature, for example,
yeah.
and to be eating good food. There's a lot we can do that doesn't involve any sort of medical or healthcare intervention. And that to me makes so much more sense. That's what our ancestors did. Our ancestors didn't sort of wait around until we got sick and then you just kind of lived your life,
Yeah.
because
And
there wasn't that alternative. There wasn't
it's
the
the
blood pressure
experience and
medication.
quality of life also. And normally, like, especially things with like high blood pressure, you don't know you
Yes,
have it until you have a kind of incident. So,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And this is the thing that I think, and I certainly saw it a lot. And it was something when I worked with GPs in the pharma industry, they would say to me, patients don't want the dietary
Mm,
advice, they want the pill. They
yeah.
still want to eat all of the things that they eat,
Yeah.
They don't want to exercise. They just want the pill because they know the pill's there. If the pill wasn't there, they might have a different attitude. But if they didn't get to that point, like if we can educate people when they're still in their, childhood, teens, 20s, 30s, before their risk factors go up for these things, and people can build good habits, because it is about habits.
Yeah.
It really is about building good habits. Then we can prevent so much illness and suffering and debilitation. So it's super important.
And I think, and then, the other model, like the sickness model, is there to catch anything that comes, like that still gets through. But you're right.
Yeah.
Like if we can educate, but I know, like, even with education, it can't be standing there lecturing kids of like, do this or you're going to get this. It has to just be the norm. Like, it's almost like the dessert thing or that conversation. It's not like about it being a punishment or about it being, you can't enjoy a cheeseburger because you need to have an apple. It just needs to be about this is normal, like, normalizing and making it more accessible for people.
Totally. And making it fun. Like when I'm working with clients, I don't often refer to doing exercise. I talk about moving your body.
Yeah.
It's
which is way better.
Yeah. It's a very different
because moving your body could just be walking the dog rather than having to go to the gym. It's like, I don't want to go to the gym every day. It's like, that's not
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, it's moving the body can be anything. And what I find, it really does need to be fun, and it needs to be something that the individual wants to do, rather than, okay, you're going to have to go and do 20 push-ups and 10 burpees and do it. Then immediately, I mean, I could feel myself shutting down. I was like, oh, I don't want to do that.
It's changing the languaging around, like, whether it's exercise or food or dessert or dinner or like whatever it is. It's just changing the languaging around it, rather than using it as scare tactics or manipulation, or even well-intended manipulation, like as parents who might be like, well, of course it's reasonable they don't get dessert because they didn't finish dinner, they were full. Like, it's like, I get it, but let's
Exactly. And there's it comes back to even like your first question, Jess, about the mind and talking to yourself. Like, it's the language is so important and so underestimated, the how valuable positive language can be.
And it can be really challenging to change some of those stories, even once you're in the mode of it. Like, so I think it's quite a journey, but it's such an important one, because it's not just about our health at the end of the day. It's about how we feel along the way. Like, it's about our experience of our lives in the space in between also.
Absolutely. And that's why I think having the holistic approach is really good, where you are taking into account people's likes and dislikes, taking into account what's going to fit into their lifestyle and what's not, and creating a plan that's going to be able to manage all of the limitations that might be there and maximize all of the opportunities that are there. And often when you're in your own stuff and you're having your own health issues, you just can't see past it. See past it
because you're too busy dealing with it. Like,
and the mind just telling you all of the things that you can't do, all the things you don't have time for,
or don't have the energy for.
Exactly. So it's hard, and it's hard to make changes. So that's why when I mentioned before, building the habits that are going to serve you right from the beginning is just so much easier to then stay well.
Yeah, exactly. What would you say to people who like are either listening or who in general have that resistance, but, or maybe it's like, the trauma stories or any stories, like what would you say to people that have that resistance, but also like a kind of half sort of stepping their foot in through the door about it?
I know. The first step is the hardest. I mean, I think if you talk to any runner, they'll say the hardest part of going for a run is putting the shoes on. And so actually making the appointment to get help can be the hardest part. And especially if there's been a negative experience already with regard to that. So I guess all I could say is even if you're feeling like there might be someone that can help you out there, make the appointment. Maybe check, it's great now, you can check people out on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, contact them through their website, send an email saying, hey, this is where I'm at. What can you do to help me? Sometimes that first step
Yeah.
can be, it's easy, it's non-confrontational. I often will get someone will email me through my website saying, I've got these issues, is this something you can help me with? And we can have a little dialogue over email before we
Yeah.
even get to a point of making an appointment. And I feel like that can be very helpful to just slowly take that first step, because know that once you do engage with someone that is knowledgeable in the area of health that you're having an issue with, you will get the support, you will get the help that you need. And it will be a journey. It's certainly not necessarily going to be easy. Often it's taken years for people to get to a certain state of health or disease, and it may take months to get back on track, but it's absolutely possible. So it's just taking that step.
That's it. And it's one thing that I've also learned too, like in hiring for like support for my business, even like I was sitting there trying to figure it all out on my own. And I realized just having that initial conversation, because that's what they're there to do, is to help you figure it out. So it's the same concept. Like if you're sitting there trying to figure it out, but not actually just letting that person even initially, like you said, in that initial email or contact point, help you take the steps to figure it out, you're just going to keep staying in that same little cycle. So
exactly.
I love that.
Yeah. And I think that's all you can do. I can't force someone to take the steps to heal themselves. I talk to people a lot just in passing. Often when I was teaching yoga in the studio, you'd see people and talk to them, and unless they're ready, you can't force someone. You got to be willing and open to receive the help.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, so much goodness in that. Where can people find you and follow your work, and maybe even reach out to you if they're in that same boat?
Yeah. Well, I'm on socials, Instagram and Facebook at Susie Garden Wellness, and that's SUSIE. And yes, my real name is Garden.
I've thought of that so many times. I'm like, that's so fitting.
I know, it's so funny. And my website is susiegarden.com, and you can totally see what I do there and reach out to me through there, or message me through socials as well. I'd love to hear from people.
Or subscribe to your podcast, The Wellness Glow.
Oh, totally.
Also, there's so much information and just useful reminders and everything in there too. So if you're kind of wanting that soft introduction, but that can be a good place to start as well.
Yeah, for sure, because the topics I cover on the podcast are all related to stress, anxiety, gut health, weight management. So you can kind of see where I'm coming from and my point of view and my approach. Also, just to let you know, my clinic is online, so I see clients from all over the world. So it doesn't matter where you are, I am available.
I love that. I'll include that in the captions and the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining me and for imparting your great wealth of wisdom. It was just, I felt myself nerding out so much. So I'm so
I love talking about it.
It's stuff that I kind of talk about, but you just have all of the extra depth of the knowledge. And I'm like, tell me more. Like, this is amazing. So I'm so grateful for you coming on here and sharing that with us all, and sharing you with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess. It's been really fun. I've loved it.